He rose to his height and took down the heavy sword above him, plucked it out naked, and then spoke. "I will believe your mad tales about the exact machinery of arrows, for that is science. I will believe your mad tales about traces of life in the moon, for that is science. I will believe your mad tales about jellyfish turning into gentlemen, and everything turning into anything, for that is science. But I will not believe you when you tell me what I know to be untrue. I will not believe you when you say that you did not set forth under my authority and out of my house. The other three may conceivably have told the truth, but this last man has certainly lied. Therefore I will kill him." And with that the old and gentle king ran at the man with uplifted sword. But he was arrested by the roar of happy laughter, which told the world that there is, after all, something which an Englishman will not swallow. The Modern Scrooge. Mr. Vernon Smith, of Trinity and the Social Settlement, Tooting, author of A Higher London and the Boyg System at Work, came to the conclusion, after looking through his select and even severe library, that Dickens's Christmas Carol was a very suitable thing to be read to charwomen. Had they been men, they would have been forcibly subjected to Browning's Christmas Eve, with exposition. But chivalry spared the charwomen, and Dickens was funny and could do no harm. His fellow worker Wimpole would read things like Three Men in a Boat to the poor, but Vernon Smith regarded this as the sacrifice of principle, or what was the same thing to him, of dignity. He would not encourage them in their vulgarity. They should have nothing from him that was not literature. Still, Dickens was literature after all; not literature of a high order, of course, not thoughtful or purposeful literature, but literature quite fitted for charwomen on Christmas Eve. He did not, however, let them absorb Dickens without due anecdotes of warning and criticism. He explained that Dickens was not a writer of the first rank, since he lacked the high seriousness of Matthew Arnold. He also feared that they would find the characters of Dickens terribly exaggerated. But they did not, possibly because they were meeting them every day. For among the poor there are still exaggerated characters. They do not go to the universities to be universified. He told charwomen with progressive brightness that a mad, wicked old miser like Scrooge would be really quite impossible now. But as each of the charwomen had an uncle or a grandfather or a father-in-law who was exactly like Scrooge, his cheerfulness was not shared. Indeed, the lecture as a whole lacked something of his firm and elastic touch, and toward the end he found himself rambling and in a sort of abstraction, talking to them as if they were his fellows. He caught himself saying quite mystically that a spiritual plane, by which he meant his plane, always looked to those on the sensual, or the Dickens plane, not merely austere, but desolate. He said, quoting Bernard Shaw, that we could all go to heaven as we can all go to a classical concert, but if we did it would bore us. Realizing that he was taking his flock far out of their depth, he ended somewhat hurriedly, and was soon receiving that generous applause which is part of the profound ceremonialism of the working classes. As he made his way to the door, three people stopped him and answered him heartily enough, but with an air of hurry which he would not have dreamed of showing to people of his own class. One was a little schoolmistress, who told him with a sort of feverish meekness that she was troubled because an ethical lecturer had said that Dickens was not really progressive, but she thought he was progressive, and surely he was progressive. Of what being progressive was she had no more notion than a whale. The second person implored him for a subscription to some soup kitchen or cheap meal, and his refined features sharpened, for this, like literature, was a matter of principle with him. Quite the wrong method, he said, shaking his head and pushing past. Nothing any good but the Boyg system. The third stranger, who was male, caught him on the step as he came out into the snow and starlight, and asked him point blank for money. It was a part of Vernon Smith's principles that all such persons are prosperous impostors, and like a true mystic he held to his principles in defiance of his five senses, which told him that the night was freezing, the man very thin and weak. "If you come to the settlement between 4 and 5 on Friday week," he said, "inquiries will be made." The man stepped back into the snow with a not ungraceful gesture as of apology. He had frosty silver hair, and his lean face, though in shadow, seemed to wear something like a smile. As Vernon Smith stepped briskly into the street, the man stooped down as if to do up his bootlace. He was, however, guiltless of any such dandyism, and as the young philanthropist stood pulling on his gloves with some particularity, a heavy snowball was suddenly smashed into his face. He was blind for a black instant, and then, as some of the snow fell, saw faintly, as in a dim mirror of ice or dreamy crystal, the lean man bowing with the elegance of a dancing master, and saying amiably, "A Christmas box." When he had quite cleared his face of snow, the man had vanished. For 3 burning minutes Cyril Vernon Smith was nearer to the people and more their brother than he had been in his whole high-stepping, pedantic existence. For if he did not love a poor man, he hated one, and you never really regard a labourer as your equal till you can quarrel with him. "Dirty cad," he muttered, "filthy fool, mucking with snow like a beastly baby. When will they be civilized? Why, the very state of the street is a disgrace and a temptation to such tomfools. Why isn't all this snow cleared away, and the street made decent?" To the eye of efficiency there was indeed something to complain of in the conditions of the road. Snow was banked up on both sides in white walls, and toward the other, the darker end of the street, even rose into a chaos of low, colourless hills. By the time he reached them he was nearly knee deep, and was in a far from philanthropic frame of mind. The solitude of the little streets was as strange as their white obstruction, and before he had ploughed his way much further he was convinced that he had taken a wrong turning and fallen upon some formless suburb unvisited before. There was no light in any of the low dark houses, no light in anything but the blank emphatic snow. He was modern and morbid. Hellish isolation hit and held him suddenly. Anything human would have relieved the strain, if it had been only the leap of a garroteur. Then the tender human touch came indeed, for another snowball struck him and made a star on his back. He turned with a fierce joy and ran after a boy, escaping. Ran with dizzy and violent speed, he knew not for how long. He wanted the boy. He did not know whether he loved or hated him. He wanted humanity. He did not know whether he loved or hated it. As he ran he realized that the landscape around him was changing in shape, though not in colour. The houses seemed to dwindle and disappear in hills of snow, as if buried. The snow seemed to rise in tattered outlines of crag and cliff and crest. But he thought of nothing of all these impossibilities until the boy turned to bay. When he did, he saw the child was queerly beautiful, with gold red hair and a face as serious as complete happiness. And when he spoke to the boy his own question surprised him, for he said for the first time in his life, "What am I doing here?" And the little boy, with very grave eyes, answered, "I suppose you are dead." He had also for the first time a doubt of his spiritual destiny. He looked round on a towering landscape of frozen peaks and plains, and said, "Is this hell?" And the child stared, but did not answer. He knew it was heaven. All over that colossal country, white as the world round the pole, little boys were playing, rolling each other down dreadful slopes, crushing each other under falling cliffs. For heaven is a place where one can fight for ever without hurting. Smith suddenly remembered how happy he had been as a child, rolling about on the safe sand hills around Conway. Right above Smith's head, higher than the cross of St. Paul, but curving over him like the hanging blossom of a harebell, was a cavernous crag of snow. 100 feet below him, like a landscape seen from a balloon, lay snowy flats as white and as far away. He saw a little boy stagger with many catastrophic slides to that toppling peak. and seizing another little boy by